Okay, here we go with our Figma UI walkthrough. When you first start Figma, you'll be presented with the File Explorer window, which is this one here. It's worth noting with Figma that all of your files will be stored in Figma's cloud online. You have to use the internet when using Figma, and all of your files will be stored in the cloud. Nothing is stored locally, which keeps things nice and simple, and you also don't need to save your files when you're working with them. Over here on the left hand side we have a menu. You will mostly be working with in your recent files or your draft files. Figma has two types of files. It has draft files, which you'll be using the most, and later on down the track, if you upgrade to the paid plan, you'll be able to publish files. So draft files is mostly what you'll be working with. You can also publish files to your team, which is something you don't really need to worry about at the moment. Lastly, this is pretty cool. You have a Figma community which has all sorts of assets like icons, graphics, layouts and stuff like that. The community is fantastic. You can explore that in your own time. We won't get into that in this tutorial, but it's worth noting that Figma has a pretty cool growing community. And that is it. Once you start it up, you'll see all your files, and the next thing to do is click on create a new design file. Okay, here we have the main Figma UI. The UI is pretty much broken down into four main sections. Number one being the layers palette here. Number two being our toolbar up the top here. Number three being our canvas or our desktop section here. And number four being our properties here on the right hand side. I will be running us through the basics of each of those four sections. I won't be going through everything because you don't need to know everything in this basics tutorial. So first up, it's worth talking about this section here, which is our layers panel. The layers panel has a hierarchy of three sections. So the top part of the hierarchy is actually pages. And within pages, we have what are called frames. And then within frames, we have layers. So as you can see, when I was drawing the items here on our desktop, you could see within our page, we have a frame, and within that frame, we have our layers. So that's as simple as the layers panel works. Like I said, the hierarchy is pages is number one. Within pages, we have what's called frames, and within frames, we have what's called layers. Why do we have pages? The reasons why we have pages is because, for example, if I wanted to do a number of different designs or a number of different versions, I can just simply create a new page, and within that page, I can have a completely different design or a different version. Okay, next up, let's talk about this section here, which is your desktop. And on your desktop, it's all about frames. So let's go over here, click the frame tool and draw a frame. Everything you do in Figma will revolve around frames. They are like your piece of paper in Figma, and on your piece of paper is where you create all of your designs. A cool function about frames is we have a whole bunch of presets over here on the right hand side for a whole bunch of different sizes, including website designs, even paper size designs, device sizes. So if you need a specific sized frame, you can simply select the frame here, go over to the frame in the inspection palette or the properties palette, and we can select any size frame that we want. For example, this. We can of course also create our custom sized frame, but that is up to you what size you want it to be. I also always work with presets because it just allows me to sort of set it to whatever frame size I want. And of course, within the frames is where you'll be doing all of your design work, all of your buttons, text, any design whatsoever should sit within this frame. Then you can select the top of the frame, you can move it around, you can create a number of frames on the canvas, as many as you want, and you can also rename the frame if you click over here in the layers palette. So that is frames in Figma. You will always be working with frames and always be working within frames as a way of working, which works fantastically. Okay, here we go with our next section, which is our Figma toolbar, which is this section across the top here. I'm going to talk you through the tools quickly, what they are, and how you'll be using them. First up is our general sort of cursor tool, which allows us to move stuff. Secondly, our scale tool, which allows us to scale things. Here we have our frame tool, which is a pretty important one. You'll be using this one a fair bit to draw frames onto your desktop here, like so. Underneath that, you have your slice tool, which you won't be using that much, so I wouldn't worry about that one. Here we have our graphics creation tools, which is all the typical stuff like lines, circles, and so on, where we'll be drawing shapes into our frame. Up next, we have a couple of pen tools. One of them is a pencil tool where we can sort of draw sort of free lines, and the other one is a pen tool which allows us to create more sort of rigid lines like that. Next up is our type tool, which we will place onto the frame and draw out some type like so. You will be using that tool a fair bit as well. Next up, we have the hand tool, which is simply a tool that allows us to drag around the desktop and the frame on the desktop. Next up, we have the comment tool. This one is pretty cool. You can actually create comments yourself on your own work, or you can actually manage and gather feedback and comments from other people. Great tool in Figma, gives you direct a direct function to provide comments and feedback directly onto your work. Comments here, like so. Let me tap that. Next up in the center here, we have the document stuff. Here we can rename our document, delete it, and so on. Here, for example, version 1, that's where you rename your document. Over here we have a couple more things like our profile. We also have a share functionality, prototype functionality, and also view functionality. I'll be taking you through the share functionality in another tutorial in more in depth, and that is our Figma toolbar. Okay, lastly, in our Figma UI walkthrough, we will be talking about this panel here, which is the properties panel. As the name suggests, any of the properties of our elements here can be adjusted within our property panel right here. For example, if we click on the frame, we can adjust the properties of the frame here, for example, size, position, etc. If we click on the text, we can adjust the properties of the text, for example, font, sizing, alignment, and so on. If we click on the shape here, we can adjust any of the properties of the shape, including color, for example. So that is our properties panel. If you ever want to adjust any of the properties, settings, alignment, etc. of any of your UI elements here in Figma, simply click on the object and adjust the property over here in the properties panel. And that is our Figma UI basics walkthrough for today. I hope you enjoyed that. Get yourself used to the UI, have a click around, and yeah, get settled into creating with Figma.